Namaskar and thank you for joining us on our weekly program on geoeconomics. Today we are going to discuss the economic crisis in Pakistan, a country waiting to elect a new government. There has been a reverse in the trend of poverty alleviation, with numbers of those slipping into poverty rising since 2018 rather than declining. And the World Bank has put that figure now at 40% of the population. It has said that international lenders and development partners can only provide advice or financial aid, but the crucial decisions must be made by the incoming government. Those decisions will be tough against, the strong vested interests of the military, political and business leaders. To discuss this, we have with us Professor Amita Batra, an economist and chairperson of the Center for South Asian Studies at JNU, and Dr. Smriti S. Patnaik, who is a South Asia expert from the Manohar Parrikar Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis. Thank you very much, ladies, for being with us. Professor Batra, is Pakistan in a poverty trap? The vicious cycle is being made worse by political instability.
Well, there is political instability, yes, but there are other causes that are more fundamental to the increase in poverty that we are witnessing at present, in Pakistan. And two of the main causes, that have contributed to this, apart from the immediate factors, preceding immediate factors, which have been in terms of the pandemic, the Ukraine crisis, as well as, the devastating floods. They've all contributed as immediate factors, but there are fundamental issues as far as Pakistan's growth process is concerned, because of which you do not see the natural trickle down that's expected in any consistently growing economy. So Pakistan, has not been able to develop a consistent, growth path, sustainable growth path for itself. It has had a long history of dependence on external finance. And as also, as far as Pakistan is concerned, it has not been able to, or it has not wanted to, it has lacked the commitment to undertake economic reforms that have been given to it as advice as part of the several loan programs, the extended fund facility programs, stability programs that it has undertaken, through the IMF. So repeated advice by international agencies, multilateral lending agencies, as well as the requirement of the economy itself has been wanting. Therefore, as far as reforms is concerned, the economic growth is concerned, it hasn't been consistent and not resulted, therefore, in the kind of development that one would expect of a consistently growing economy. You see the results, therefore, both in increasing poverty as well as human development, human capital for Pakistan.
Right. Dr. Patnaik, inflation, rising electricity prices, severe climate shocks. Can Pakistan actually rely on these multilateral institutions to bring it out of this kind of a crisis?
I think, Pakistan really does not have much choice, given the current crisis. As you were also mentioning, the poverty level also has risen quite a bit, and there is inflation, which I think is increasing. There is the fall on the dollar rate. Rupee to dollar is almost touching 289 rupees, and there is no respite to the poverty. And we also have seen, especially in Gilgit and Baltistan, how the wheat crisis led to a kind of rioting in that place. So taking everything together, I think, what you see, the manifestation which we are witnessing currently in Pakistan is not something which has been made in the recent past. I think over the period of time, the lopsided development budget, more spending on the military and other security issues. So obviously, World Bank has been wanting that the Pakistan need to adopt certain reform measures. Like, for example, it wants the subsidies to go. It's not something which is very Pakistan specific. We have seen also in the Sri Lankan economic crisis, the same demand was made that, you can't really keep on giving subsidies. Then, of course, the tax net is extremely low. And on the top of it, agriculture and also the estate is not taxed. So that actually, when you are spending a lot, but at the same time, you really do not have any way to generate revenue. So this strictures is very much apparent, in the recent past, how Pakistan has moved. to get this particular bailout package of 3 billion. I think
Sure.
1.2 billion they have already received.
Professor Batra, human development indicators you were talking about also in Pakistan are comparable, in fact, to sub-Saharan Africa. That's what the World Bank says. Now, elections are due, but for the electorate, is there anything to choose from?
Well, I think the choice as far as economic choices are concerned, or economic parameters on which the population would base its choices, I think are very, very limited. As rightly said, you see, the options should be for those who are committed to economic reforms, because as I said, Pakistan is in dire need of correcting its growth model and growth process. I think this is also something that has been indicated by the World Bank, that thus far what Pakistan has been doing in terms of reliance on external finance, external aid, repeatedly going to the multilateral agencies for borrowing, is not going to work this time. It has not been able to, or it has not committed itself to implementing the reforms that were suggested in the earlier IMF program of 2019. Whether it was correction in exchange rates or whether it was inflation rate control, mobilization of resources, misdirected expenditure, correction in that, none of that has really been done in terms of correcting for the structural causes, that have led to this kind of an outcome for Pakistan. Given also the kind of impending elections in the country,
Yes.
you see, I think it's going to be a very, very difficult choice to make, but I think it's imperative to make a choice that would ascertain or that would determine the future of the Pakistan to be able to grow in a consistent manner. But that is going to be possible only if Pakistan corrects the fundamental weaknesses,
Sure.
starts to create a manufacturing industrial base for itself. It has not been able to do that. So
Sure.
when it has borrowed, it has grown, but it has grown in spurts. It doesn't have a consistent growth in the past either. So there was improvement earlier as far as poverty is concerned, but never consistent developmental outcomes, you see. So we've
Right.
never seen outcomes in terms of education or health, because expenditure has not been directed towards these social sectors. It has been strategically, politically motivated and therefore misdirected. So we haven't really seen what should have contributed to a good labor force for Pakistan, that is healthy, educated labor force. So
Okay.
that can only come if growth happens, and growth will happen only if Pakistan corrects its structural weaknesses. So the
Fair enough.
commitment has to come
So,
from the political class.
sure.
So they have to commit to itself, and the people have to make the right choice at this point of
So
time.
all the parties involved should commit to that. Dr. Patnaik, I mean, the World Bank says that the country actually needs to relook at its policy decisions because the country is currently driven by strong vested interests of the military, the political, and the business class. But the question is how? How is it going to do this? It would require revolution. We know that in the elections, there are three parties: the PPP, the PMLN, and the PTI. The question is, I mean, there is a deep state also. So amongst this, the questions of what Professor Batra has raised, none of these parties seem to be looking at those key, changes, because they are all vested interests.
That is true, but the thing is that it's not that even if Pakistan tomorrow has a stable government, the point is that most of the elections in the region is fought on populist kind of measures. So they don't expand the base of the income tax. Only they have very few people who pay the tax. And on the top of it, like for example in Pakistan, you have a lot many people who are landowners. And since agriculture is not taxable, so many of these people who are extremely rich really do not pay tax. They show that they are their main profession is agriculture, so they don't pay tax. So unless and until you bring these big landowners to the tax net and tax their agricultural income, I think it is going to be difficult. Second, as you said, in the past we have seen a lot of instability in Pakistan, and that actually has happened for various reasons. There is a deep state which I would say that is the fourth political, the kingmaker in Pakistan. And one of the reasons many attribute that Imran Khan did not receive the majority in the parliament, when he was elected, because he can be manipulated if you really do not have majority on your own. So when the election is scheduled for January, February, one doesn't know whether the
Yes.
delimitation will be completed by that time. The current caretaker government has in fact been given certain power, unlike in the past, to
Yes.
take certain economic decisions, because World Bank doesn't want the money which it has given to Pakistan, 1.2 billion, and for the purpose for which it is given, that
Yes.
needs to be implemented. So the caretaker government job is not now limited only to hold the election, but also to see that those economic measures actually are undertaken by the government. As I said, unless until there is deep reform within the Pakistan government takes step to initiate deep reforms, I don't think the economy will back in track.
Sure.
The friends will always provide some monies. Obviously there is a price to it, and I think sooner Pakistan realizes this point, I think it is better. But I don't see in the short term any kind of improvement which will see that Pakistan is afloat again economically. I would say that.
So both of you are talking about reforms. Professor Batra, the World Bank has asked Pakistan to tax its agriculture, as Dr. Patnaik has been saying, and also the real estate sector. This is to achieve economic stability. But it's also asked them to take measures to increase the tax GDP ratio to 5%. How feasible is this?
Well, feasibility would be derived out of growth. I mean, at the moment, what you have is a very small section of population that probably holds a majority of the assets. So, of course, you've got to raise the tax rates, as far as this small section is concerned. But the other thing that is required is also to bring about growth and expansion as far as the economy is concerned, which can only happen if they bring about a solid manufacturing base, and if they invest in their human capital so that they can, with the help of a healthy, educated labor force, bring about sufficient productivity to contribute to overall growth. When you have positive growth, you increase the potential for taxation and tax revenue. So mobilization of greater revenue, one can happen through increasing taxes, but yes, that would only be limited to the small section that holds the majority of the assets at present. Agriculture may not be the easiest thing to do at the moment, but I think Pakistan needs correction, needs to think with a longer perspective. And it's absolutely imperative for it to think, because we must understand that what Pakistan has got at present from the IMF is only a standby arrangement. And even of that, only the first installment has been given to them. The rest of the installment of even this, the standby arrangement depends on Pakistan undertaking reforms and showing some results.
Yes.
So I think it's critical for Pakistan to take these measures. Otherwise, as it has seen in the past, you see, there will be repeated crises. It will have to go to the IMF again and again, or it will have to depend on its friends who may or may not be forthcoming always.
Right.
I mean, we've seen recently not necessarily has its best friend come forward immediately at the time of crisis to contribute to the total assistance pool.
We'll come to that a little later. But Dr. Patnaik, at the same time, the World Bank is looking at prescriptions to cut expenditure by nearly 3% of the GDP to get back to fiscal prudence. Now, surely, I mean, a government needs to spend money to create jobs. I mean, everything is left to the government to kickstart the economy. What will be the key priorities for, this new government that's coming in?
I think this reduction of the expenditure is something I don't see. It's not going to be easy, but surely Pakistan will definitely try and reduce its expenditure on certain issues. But at the same time, I think probably one of the steps which Pakistan required to take is the reduction can happen in terms of the defense expenditure. I would say, because that is where a lot of money is being spent, which can be reduced. So therefore, I think it is a significant decision which the government needs to take. But of course, caretaker government probably is not in a best position to take this decision. With the new government coming, one also needs to see that what kind of government is going to come. There is a possibility that perhaps the PTI may not, see return to power. But perhaps there will be a kind of coalition, because if you have a coalition government, it is easy to manipulate for the army.
Yes.
So therefore, I would say that a lot will depend on the new government. But again, you are inheriting a very weak economy. Like, for example, when Shahbaz Sharif took over as Prime Minister after Imran Khan, he inherited a very weak economy. Of course, he took steps to increase the price of the fuel. So there are also other international events, which is also impacting on Pakistan's economy. Like, I was just speaking about the fuel crisis. There was COVID crisis, there was flood. So, Pakistan has seen a series of setback. And because of the kind of terrorism which Pakistan has been witnessing, the investment in the country has been very, very less. So when you have no investment which can generate employment opportunity, apart from China, I don't think there is much investment from other countries. There are certain promises which is made by UAE and
Yes.
Saudi Arabia, but those investment has only been placed, but it has not come about. Second is that, Pakistan's, if you look at Pakistan's export basket, I think that also has, doesn't show any kind of promise. So with this kind of economic situation, even if you are asked to reduce the expenditure, probably that could be one way to see that, with a very limited revenue, if your expenditure is reduced, perhaps, you will be able to somehow tether through this, the kind of economic challenges Pakistan is facing. But
Absolutely.
it is
And
not
you
an easy
mentioned-
choice, not for this government, nor for the future government, I would say.
Right. And you mentioned defense expenditure as should be cut. But Professor Batra, the country has a balance of payments crisis. There's not enough exports to earn foreign exchange to pay for the imports. And yet the rich seem to be having enough money to buy luxury products. This is a pretty big paradox, wouldn't you think? And how do you view this? That this group of small group controls such a lot of wealth, and a lot of it is offshore.
That is true. As I said, a majority of the assets in Pakistan are held by a small group, and I think that small group overlaps across, whether it's ownership of assets as far as agriculture is concerned or ownership of power is concerned, So power concentration, economic concentration probably overlaps as far as the Pakistan economic structure is concerned. Hence, it becomes very difficult for them to undertake the kind of reforms that are suggested, But I think, as I said earlier, Pakistan is not in a position anymore to ignore these warnings, So it cannot afford to anymore be directed or be misdirecting its expenditure. It has to redirect its expenditure towards building, the manufacturing capacity, industrial capacity, labor force, It has to remove the biases that have existed in development and in the development process, such as, bring about gender parity as far as education is concerned. Allow for greater participation of women in labor force. All of these factors have impinged upon the structure of the labor force productivity, and the nature of investment that is made by the government. If the government redirects its expenditure away from where it does in terms of what it thinks are strategic causes, I think it needs to redirect it towards greater productive uses, and that first and foremost would be in terms of public investment in infrastructure. Pakistan is hugely energy deficient, hugely deficient as far as physical infrastructure is concerned. So public investment in what could be productivity generating sectors or productivity generating expenditure ultimately, I think that's where a lot of thinking needs to go. Strategic choices for Pakistan in terms of economic choices need to be made. Otherwise, Pakistan will only be depending upon short-term inflows of aid and assistance from its friends, and probably keep, it'll tide over a crisis, but get into a crisis soon after, which has been its history now for a long enough time. So change in course for Pakistan to redirect its expenditure towards productive uses, to be able to invest in human capital, to bring about or focus on how to bring about an increase in productivity of labor force, eliminate the gender disparities as far as both participation in labor force and education are concerned, rural-urban biases are concerned. I think these are what will lead Pakistan to consolidate a process that will ultimately lead it to a consistent growth path.
Yes.
Otherwise, what has been happening in the past, what we are looking at today, close to an economic meltdown, it will continue with that.
So that's the nature of the trap. Dr. Patnaik, the World Bank wants Pakistan, in fact, to reform its over-regulated private sector, the agriculture sector, as we talked a little earlier, and also energy sectors. Now, how best can this country reimagine its growth, given what we talked about earlier as well, the control of the deep state?
I think, the kind of reform which World Bank wants is not impossible, though it appears a bit difficult at present, because you have a caretaker government. It has been given certain power to take economic decision. I think in terms of real estate, probably that is one of the sector which is completely controlled by the elite. And similarly energy, but also at the same time I have seen in the past a few months there is increase in the energy price. The PPP model which Pakistan had adopted in the past actually makes energy very, very expensive. So if energy is very expensive, then distribution becomes a problem, and that is one of the reasons why the private sector, which are basically busy in energy production, have not been able to sell that energy to the common people. We have seen in the past how Pakistan faced power outrage
Yes.
in the country.
Right.
So that becomes very difficult. I think if anybody is interested, there is a very interesting book which has come not very long ago, Big Capital in an Unequal World, the micropolitics of wealth in Pakistan. That actually will tell you a lot of story how the rich accumulates wealth, and how they spend the wealth, and that actually something once you read it, you know that how difficult it is.
Yeah, we're running short of time, so let me just get in a few quick questions. Professor Batra, the Chinese banks gave a loan of $2.3 billion last year, and this year again about 700 million US dollars to shore up Pakistan's forex reserves. But China is blaming the West for Pakistan's crisis. How would you look at this assessment from the Chinese side? They probably are reluctant to give more money.
Well, they are reluctant to give money, and that should probably be a lesson for Pakistan to not believe in what could be only fair weather friends rather than all weather friends, So I think it's important for Pakistan to, as I said, look away from only strategic partners contributing towards its economic growth process. It has to think of its growth process independent of its strategic choices. It has to start thinking about its growth process independent of what it thinks is a locational, geographic advantage that is given to it, or that's inherent for it, So I think going beyond that, realizing or accepting the reality, following the reforms that the World Bank has recommended, the IMF has recommended, I don't think those reforms are difficult. If you are in a difficult situation, those reforms are recommended, you need to undertake.
Yes.
What I think is absolutely crucial, in undertaking reforms is that the reforms also should have a certain element of stability to them. It's not like some reforms are taken, partially undertaken now and then overruled by this next government, or eliminated by the next government. So consistency and stability of reforms, the reform process is very important.
They have to stay for the long term.
Political regimes, and
absolutely.
across the length, so that's very important.
Yes, let's get the last word in from Dr. Patnaik. The Gulf Arab states, they've traditionally supported Pakistan, but they too are reluctant now. So how does this leave Pakistan? I mean, what does it do? It basically looks towards China. So how do you look at it, as a defense analyst as well?
would say that, at least in the past, and the UAE and Saudi Arabia have come to the rescue of Pakistan, and that has played a very significant role. So now both the countries are speaking of investment in particular sectors. I think energy is also one of them. But in today newspaper, I also saw in Pakistan that they are going to face another 18 billion as fine if the Iran-Pakistan oil pipeline is not implemented. And the Senate Foreign Relations Committee has asked that why it is not being implemented because of the US sanction. So I would say it is, the future doesn't look rosy. I would also say that, you really can't keep on relying on China, and rescheduling of the debt really does not resolve the problem unless and until China really, converts this debt to a kind of grant.
Okay.
I don't see any kind of economic revival happening.
Right.
Because after all,
Sure.
you may adopt certain reforms, but at the same time, you are going to pay back the kind of loan which you have taken from bilateral loans, which you have taken
Yes.
from China at a very commercial rate, more than 6 to 7%, I
Okay.
would say.
We'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much, Dr. Smriti Patnaik and Professor Amita Batra. Thank you for enlightening us on this important subject. And in conclusion, let's just say this, that, Wikipedia says that Pakistan is accumulating about 14 billion rupees in loans daily to meet its expenses. Its domestic and external debt stands at around 280 billion US dollars now. It's continuing to climb. And the country is eligible for debt service suspension initiative. So basically, it's in that category of countries which can postpone its debt. But the economy is struggling. It's struggling from this escalating national debt, from managing the inefficient use of its natural resources. It has a rapidly growing population as well, and it's combating massive unemployment and the health and education sectors, as Professor Batra was speaking about, is also pretty bad. So pretty tough task ahead for Pakistan. Thanks very much for watching. Namaskar.